And we are in volume 2 of the Mark of the Beast, and we are in chapter 15, which is Satan is bound. Satan is bound. And that's something, men, that we have looked forward to seeing. We have that to look forward to here very soon. But before Satan is bound, you're going to have that great burning that is going to destroy 4/5 of the earth's population. And as we're going to continue in our studies today, that's all as a result of deception. It's all of a result of sin. It's as a result of what Satan has influenced mankind to do for the past 6,000 years. And we left off here, we're on page 235 here, where it says, ask the leaders. And, the section of this right before that is the truth of Satan's deception. One of the first things that I can remember learning when I came to the house of Yahweh, one of the very first scriptures that I learned, and this was actually one of the very first scriptures that I proved for myself, was when Pastor said that the whole world is deceived. He said Revelation 12:9 says that Satan has the whole world deceived. And I remember that going through my mind and say, oh yeah, right. And so I go and I turn to it, pick up the King James Version of the Bible, turn to it and say, oh, there it is. And then he turns over to First Yahweh under 1 John chapter 3. And he says, and this is what sin is, it's the breaking of the law. And I says, yeah, right that it says that. And then I turned over there, and sure enough, that's exactly what it said. We have been deceived. This entire world has been deceived. And everyone, before they're brought into Yahweh's house, lives under that deception until Yahweh opens our eyes, opens our minds to the truth. In this deception from Satan, as Pastor wrote here in this book, he shows us deception is known throughout the scriptures. It's one of the first truths one learns when Yahweh begins to open the human mind to understanding, is the fact that the world is spiritually blinded. And it's that realization, and as the more that we study, the more that we read, the more that we study, the more that we saw just how deceived we were. And I say were because we are no longer fall under that deception. We're now learning to, we know what sin is, we know what's bringing these things about, and not only that, but we're also learning what the solution to that is. And he showed that spiritual blind people are blind to seeing the joy in obeying the laws of Yahweh, blind to seeing the harm that mankind has brought, is bringing, and will continue to bring upon himself by continually disobeying the laws of Yahweh. And that rings very true. The world is spiritually blind. They can't see that eating pork is bringing harm to themselves. They can't see that by committing adultery and fornication, those sins that are listed in Leviticus chapter 18, they can't see that those are bringing harm to themselves and to those they practice those things with, but also to those who are around them. It doesn't just affect that individual or the two individuals that are involved. This rings true from the health laws, which bring suffering through sickness when these laws are ignored, to the more severe heartache and even bloodshed due to the breaking of the moral laws, to the outright extremes of suffering, the suffering and death brought on all nations through warfare, just because they refuse to obey the laws of loving your neighbor as yourself. And if you think about that, just that law, just that one summary, of that law that Yeshua gave, said that the greatest commandment is to love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. But the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And he said, upon these two hang all of the law and the prophets. Well, you see, those two laws that he gave there are very, very broad outlines of what's embodied in the entire 613 law of Yahweh. Just as the 10 commandments are a breakdown of the rest of the 613 laws. So, Yahweh gave Moshe those 10 commandments as that outline. And Yahshua, he even made it simpler by breaking it down and summarizing under those two. And it shows here, he says, ask the leaders. If you were to ask the leaders of the mighty nations of this earth today, what will secure your peace? Their answer to you will be, we must become military superior to every other nation to secure lasting peace. Well, this is the way it was. It started with Cain. It started all the way back there. And it's continued on through the present day. It's never changed. The United States President Ronald Reagan proposed a Star Wars program intended to secure a lasting peace for the United States. He also deployed deadly long-range missiles in many locations in Europe. He authorized building more and more powerful submarines, ships, and fighter planes. We still see those things under development today. We see the more and more new ones coming out. All major nations now have enough military arsenals to overkill 10 times the existing population of this planet. Can any sensible person truthfully say that these military arsenals are bringing peace? They never have. There was a statement that was made recently, why do we have all these weapons if we're not going to use them? Remember, Pastor, that was brought out here not long ago. Why do we have all these if we're not going to use them? Well, the truth is that they do fully intend on using them to bring their peace. But it will never, the scripture shows it will never bring peace. Yet the nations of this whole world will not change the military path that they are now taking. And if you remember, Pastor talked about the Tower of Babel? Remember he talked about that? That was actually in the 7th book of Yisrayl, part 2, chapter 37. And he, I'm not gonna go through that whole thing, but it does. He talks about the deception and how shallow the thinking of Christianity is when they think that, well, what they did is they dug down, they found a spot for this tower, they dug down, they found bedrock, and then they built this tower that reached up into the heavens. But that's not what that was. We know that's not what it was, and Pastor explains here that that's not what that was. And he shows here, he says, what was this tower for? What was this tower for? He says, this was not a high tower made of rock that someone would climb up like a mountain. They're building the same tower today. They're building the exact same tower today. In the book, The Keys of This Blood, that was put out by a Roman Catholic Church priest for our time, shows that the goals of the Pope to take over the world, to rule the entire world. And they knew, this man wrote this book, and he knew this. And he said in his book that men decide to build a tower of their geopolitical dreams. And remember, that it was dealing with that geopolitical system. And then down in verse 10, he says, let me read you another one. He says, this comes from a book called What the Bible Really Says, speaking of this tower. And it says, now the scientists, let me see here. If we can get that in there a little bit better here. It says, now the technologists have discovered a universal language in the figures and the formulas that enable them to rebuild buried ziggurats and to make new towers to reach into the heavens. Now remember, the ziggurat, as Pastor explained and it showed, they were temples, they were churches. He says the gentries and the missile silos, the ICBMs, with thermonuclear warheads and the neutron bomb, the question is now whether we will restrain ourselves from doing what we have prepared ourselves for, including the annihilation of all life on this planet. We might do well to remember this parable of the Tower of Babel. And Pastor says because that's all it was. If Yahweh had not stopped it at that time, the advancement of the technology, if he had not put an end to what was going on with that Nimrod system back in that day, then mankind could have destroyed himself from the face of all life from the face of the earth at that time. And then down in verse 12, he says, but anyway, this tower, I want you to remember this. This tower that we learned last week, they were temples. They were merely temples, and each one of them had this same pinnacle on top, just like the churches have today. And as I read to you last week, and please remember this, the reason the pinnacle is up on top of this thing is to divert the divine punishment, as they call it, which Yahweh says, you're going to bring this, or you're going to bring these things upon yourself. And all of these, the curses that are listed in the book of Yahweh, all of the so-called punishments, all of the so-called vengeance, as that Christianity has twisted and turned these things around to make Yahweh seem like a mean old God, is nothing more than the consequences of breaking the law of Yahweh, which he warned us not to do. He warned us not to do these things, because this is going to be the result. You know, all of these curses that we see, the wars, the violence, have you noticed it seems like there's a lot more violence and a lot more things that are being, that are showing up on the news here over the past couple of weeks? I mean, you know, stabbing, shootings, you've got all of these things that are, and it's not just involving one or two people, but it's involving a mass number of people. You know, these things are starting to occur and starting to come to the forefront more and more. Well, and that's all as a result of this confusion. It's as a result of the confusion that comes about from the breaking of this law of Yahweh. And it not only applies to the violence and things like that, but it also, as was shown here on page 236, it also has to do with our health. It says, leading health authorities of our time keep telling this world of the consequences of wrong eating habits. You know, they say, you know, the world, they recognize, yeah, if you eat wrong, then you're going to get sick. The consumption of the wrong kinds of foods and the consumption of foods that were not created for the human body is costing the people of this world millions of dollars on health care. Outrageous doctor bills, needless suffering, and early death affect millions of people needlessly each year. But will we change our eating habits? Will anyone actually admit to what they have actually done to themselves has caused his or her own sickness? Only very seldom will you find anyone admit their own guilt. In those in the house of Yahweh, we do admit to our own guilt. We confess those things and we repent of those things, and we are converting to this perfect way of life, which, Pastor, you know, through the practice of these things, you know, people's health are turn around, and they start getting better. These conditions and stuff that they have slow down, and in some cases they actually get reversed. You know, but but the problem with the health industry and the problem with that is they lean upon their own understanding. They lean upon their own studies, and as a result, you know, their studies are flawed. You know, but your own Bible shows that most sicknesses is a result of sin. In Yachanan Mark 2:5-9 here, it says, when Yeshua saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven you. But there were certain scribes sitting there and reasoning in their minds, thinking, why does this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but Yahweh only? And immediately when Yeshua perceived in his spirit that they reasoned this way within themselves, he said to them, why do you have these thoughts in your mind? You know, you look at the insight that he had. And he says, which is easier to say to the paralytic, go, your sins are forgiven, or say, get up and take your bed and walk? When the paralytic's sins were forgiven, then he arose, took up his bed, and walked away. Then on the top of page 237 here, we're going to just I'm going to try to hit just some of the highlights on some of these articles here over the next couple of pages. And I do have some things, I think, that are probably a little bit more current than when this was written, just so we can see, you know, so you can see the accuracy really of what Pastor, showed us here. But just as mankind places stop signs and signal lights to guard against traffic accidents at a dangerous intersection, so Yahweh has placed signs at dangerous intersections of moral character. And that's what the laws of Yahweh are. The laws of Yahweh guide and show the way that we can safely live with peace and joy and health and without any of the curses that we see in the world. These are the stop signs. These are the lights. These are the roadmap and the directions to that. Millions of people have totally ignored the moral laws for years and are now beginning to reap the harvest of what they have sown. Let's see here. Okay, so we see here about the AIDS epidemic. And anybody remember when AIDS first came about? About the year you first heard it? Yeah? 82. I heard 1982. Okay. I can remember hearing it. I remember hearing rumblings of it. This is going to date me a little bit. I was a senior in high school in 1982. That's when I graduated, and I remember in 1981, 82, hearing about this new epidemic, this new disease that was affecting homosexual men, and and they were talking about this about AIDS. And in this article here, it shows here this irrational fear. Or this is the article here. The article says, irrational fear, paranoia, and apocalyptic statements have abounded more than one normally understated. Scientist has determined AIDS is the disease of the century. Remember, they didn't know what caused it. They had no idea what it was. But it shows here. It shows others have in the traditional justification viewed it as, it says, God's revenge on sodomites and junkies. Well, it's not revenge. Okay, and remember, it's not revenge. It's the consequence of breaking those laws. That's simply what it is. There have been far more pervasive epidemics. It shows here. At least at that point, it mentions the Spanish flu. And it shows here, it says, let me see here. Notice here what this doctor said here. This UCLA immunologist who is overseeing this individual's care said the word cure is not yet in the vocabulary. And it won't be in the vocabulary because there is no cure for it. This one individual says that he's very scared to die, such a young man. I'd like a little bit more time, said a 28-year-old patient. And notice here it shows it said the man is not gay. He wasn't a homosexual. He is married and the father of 2 children, but he readily admits to a life notice of what? Of promiscuity and a history of many liaisons with prostitutes. I lived in the fast lane, he confesses. If only God would give me a break, is what he was asking for. Okay, but you can see those laws that he was violating there in Leviticus 18. He was out committing this adultery and this fornication, and this is where how these things were transmitted. And the thoughts on all this. The thoughts on it doesn't matter whatever's consenting between 2 adults. Whatever's consenting is just fine. Well, according to Yahweh's law, it is not. And Yahweh's very clear of that. And this is a result. This teaching, that teaching all results from. Remember what we read about the Tower of Babel? Okay, what does Babel or Babylon mean? All right, it means confusion. Okay, well, I looked up the word tower. Just in Webster's dictionary. because, it was the teachings, it was what was coming forth from the Tower of Babel, that geopolitical system, remember, that, that talks about this peace through strength. Well, Babylon means confusion. And this definition of this word tower, I just want you to take a look here at because the first one or the first two actually have to do with a physical structure. And like Pastor showed us, we're not dealing with the physical structure when we're dealing with the Tower of Babel. Remember that he showed that was a parable. But look at number 3. Look at this third definition down there. One that provides support or protection. So who is it that provides support for teaching this confusion? And praise Yahweh, that's right. It's the Vatican. It's anybody that teaches that sin is okay. It's anybody that teaches contrary to the law of Yahweh. It's anybody that reinforces the idea that the laws of Yahweh are done away with. That is that one that provides the support for that, and also the protection for that teaching. Because anybody that comes against that teaching, that the laws were nailed to the cross, we have the history of the Crusades. We have the history of the Inquisitions. We have the history of what was done to the prophets. We have the history of what was done to the apostles. We have the history of what was done to Yeshua. We see those things, and we can see to the extent that the people will go to, that these people that support and uphold this Tower of Babel will go to in order to make sure that that teaching continues to go forth. And that the way that went, was Yahweh actually allowed the house of Yahweh to be wiped out. After Emperor Diocletian, after Pope, I guess he was a pope also, but the Emperor Diocletian, brought the 10th and most severe persecution against the house of Yahweh. The house of Yahweh, and this was right before Constantine came onto the scene. But this was, it was that persecution, that severe persecution, that literally wiped the house of Yahweh off the face of the earth as an established, organized religion. Okay, and then he had little pockets here and there, but that was what the Crusades went after. That was what the Inquisitions went after, to stamp out any form of holiness, to keep this from going forth. Well, Yahweh knew that was going to take place, and he allowed it to take place. But he allowed that to take place for a reason, because for 1900 years, the scriptures show that there was no salvation taught, because the mouths of those to preach the reward were silenced until the time period known as the last days, when the house of Yahweh would be reestablished. Why would the house of Yahweh, why would it have to be reestablished if it was if there was a continual line from the Messiah all the way through today? Why would the house have to be reestablished? It wouldn't make any sense, right? Makes absolutely no sense. So what we see is the house of Yahweh was wiped out, and for 1900 years, the deception ran rampant until again, the house of Yahweh was reestablished by the two witnesses in a specific time period known as the last days, to bring, just as Moshe did, just as Yeshua did, to bring a warning to mankind of what sin brings. But not just the warning of what sin brings, but also the solution to the problem. And that's what we're here learning. We know what the problem is, but we're also learning what the solution is. Not only what the solution is, but the proper application of that solution. What we're doing here is extremely important and not something to be taken lightly. And I know we don't. But they're talking about AIDS. It says, how is this deadly disease transmitted? It's transmitted sexually. And it's transmitted sexually, especially in the way that the sodomites conduct themselves. Okay, on page 238. Where did this disease originate? The shocking answer is that it comes from an African green monkey. 2 laws of Yahweh that have been totally ignored, which have caused all this heartache. And if just these 2 laws would have been kept by this world, untold thousands of lives would have been saved. The suffering and agony would not have come to pass upon the thousands who have already contracted the disease, who have already contracted it, and upon innumerable thousands who have yet to contract it. And the thing about these diseases, and we're going to see one of them, one of these diseases that goes hand in hand with HIV is tuberculosis. They work hand in glove. And we're going to see that. We're going to see about that in just a little bit. But you've got to remember, people can carry these things for years and not realize that they're infected. They can have these things within them, and they're just hiding, waiting. It's called latent. They're called latent, which means that they're a carrier, but they haven't manifest any symptoms. That's just like syphilis and gonorrhea. Those STDs, they have, somebody can test positive for them, but not show any signs or symptoms. And if somebody's not showing any signs or symptoms, they're not going to be tested for them. And then what are they doing? They're going out in their sins. They're actually spreading these to others. Okay? So we see these 2 laws, Leviticus 18:22. You shall not have relations with a man as with a woman, and then Leviticus 18:23. The same goes with animals. And it says, does mankind, when they know the cause, on page 239 here, does mankind, when they know the cause of these deadly diseases, readily repent of having broken those laws, or do they seek to find a way to continue these immoral practices which have brought all this pain and suffering on in the first place? Once they realize what's brought them on, do they quit? Nope. What do? Run to the doctor and say, Doc, give me a shot. Take this pain away. So they run to the doctor. They'll get a shot. They'll get some type of medication. They'll get something. And then the symptoms go away. And in their mind they say, I'm cured. No, you're not cured. The symptoms are hidden. Man, it'd be like us. It would be like us cleaning our house, sweeping the kitchen, lifting up the rug, and just kind of sweeping the stuff up underneath the rug and putting the rug back down and say, oh, that's clean. It's out of sight. It's clean. Yeah, but it's just hidden under the rug. You can't see it. But you know what? That rug can only conceal so much. And eventually, it's going to come spilling out, and it's going to be evident. All the filthiness, all the uncleanness that is underneath that rug is going to be made known. It's the same way with these diseases. They can only be withheld. They can only be hidden for so long before they overwhelm the body. And by the time they do that, there isn't a whole lot that can be done. But it says, again, I'm not going to go through all of these because there's a lot of different things that are in, specifically that are in these articles here. But I just want to kind of hit some highlights here. So on page 240 here, it shows so far only 10% of the people exposed to the virus have developed symptoms. You know what that means? It shows here of the remaining 90%. This doctor notes, at this point we don't know what will take place in 15 years, but we do know that many of these people have close to normal immune function. And I'm going to add in there, for now. Because just like that rug, as these things multiply, they do become, the symptoms become more pronounced. But just because somebody isn't showing symptoms, does that mean that they're not infectious? No. Not at all. This suggests there might be other factors beside the virus that determine whether someone gets AIDS. It says some people may be protected by genetic endowment, decent nutrition, or general decent health. Well, how do we How do we attain those things? The decent nutrition, the decent health. How do we obtain those things? It's through keeping Yahweh's laws. It's that simple. This little infographic thing here kind of shows this is from the CDC, from the Centers for Disease Control, and this was, I think, what did I do here? I did something, don't know what I did, but okay. Anyway, but there you can see that there. It shows that there are 37 million people that are living with HIV. And notice, these are reported. These are reported, but this is also, this is those who are reported. 1.2 of 10.4 million people are living with active tuberculosis. There are 2 billion people that are infected. 2 billion people infected with tuberculosis. In other words, they're carrying it. It just hasn't become active yet. According to this graphic, this one graphic here that we're looking at, according to that is 1/3 of the world's population. Now, this again, this is probably back a little bit, but and that's assuming a population of 6 billion. But anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4 of the Earth's population is infected with tuberculosis. You realize that means that's 1 in 4 or 1 in 3. Think about this. If you're out in the grocery store, if you're out at Walmart, you're out at the grocery store, and you're walking through and you count 1, 2, 3. Okay, one of those 3 has got this disease. 1, 2, 3. One of those has this disease. Do you see why Pastor is saying avoid going into town, avoid doing these things if we possibly can? And if we have to, there are certain protections, there are certain things that can be done in order to protect ourselves from these things. The protection comes about from our obedience. We've got these things that we can put on our hands and we can put on our face. How is tuberculosis? How is it spread? Well, one of the ways it's spread is it's airborne. Well, when you put this one particular item, when we put it on our face and around our nose, our nose and our mouth, then the air that we're breathing in is filtered. It helps filter that. It helps so that can help protect against these diseases that are out there. Now, that doesn't mean we put this stuff on and say, all right, I'm set, I can go. And I'm going to go put myself in the worst possible situation. Only a fool would do that. But we put these things on. These things are made available to us, to help protect not only ourselves, but also those that we come in contact when we come back here. See, it's real important that we do that. When the apostles said, in the last days, perilous times will come, and that perilous means extremely dangerous, he wasn't kidding. I mean, it is extremely dangerous. These things are out there. And the thing is that these things can probably be transmitted a little bit easier than what they're saying. But continuing on here, it says, page 241, over here toward the bottom, in the bottom right-hand column, bottom right side over there, about the last 4 lines there, it says, as has already been seen in the United States, once the disease takes hold, the numbers of victims multiplies rapidly. No one knows how many sufferers around the world have died from the disease, although there have been 7,157 deaths in the United States. And you got to remember when this was written, how long ago that was. As part of its effort to calm the growing global fear of a disease that is as little understood by the public at large, and is as confounding to the researchers, the World Health Organization held a 2-day meeting last month in which one doctor rejected the tendency to compare AIDS to the great plagues of the Middle Ages. You can see here that they admit that there's little understood by the public, and it's confounding researchers, but yet they're almost kind of putting it down. They're saying, they're saying it's really not. Well, let's just read it here. It says, while acknowledging that a cure is years away, the World Health Organization panel was optimistic about the possibility of slowing the spread of AIDS through government and private information programs. They're looking at the possibility of slowing the spread through this government and private information programs. And we're going to we see some of those in place, and we'll see what their solution is. Their solution is not to turn from the sin, not to turn from the cause, which is what we are training to teach people to do, because that's the only way that this is going to be dealt with. It shows here the agency's reassurance in the face of public panic is firmly rooted in medical knowledge. Okay, so that medical knowledge comes from where? It comes from the imagination of their own hearts. It comes from their own thinking. Remember when we were studying about the ancient philosophers in Alexandria, Egypt? We were studying about those. And they had these philosophers who would sit, and they would come up with these logical ideas, and it would kind of follow. There was an example that we used about logic, and one of the logic could be followed through was, I'm looking up at the moon. The moon's yellow. Oh, wait a minute, I got a block of cheese over here. Man, this block of cheese is yellow. I look back up at the moon. Wait a minute, there's holes in the moon. I mean, there's little marks in the moon that looks like they're holes. This cheese has got holes in it. The moon's made of cheese. Logically, it is. It's not. We know that. But that's the logic. That's the logic of man's mind. They have this knowledge that they think that they have, and they're the smartest people that they know. But they reject the laws of Yahweh. Yahweh created us. Yahweh gave us the laws for the proper governing and the proper running of our bodies. And they reject that knowledge for their own logical ends. But we see where their thinking and their logic has gotten. The diseases haven't been cured. The diseases they thought that were wiped out are not. They're coming back, and they're coming back drug resistant. And we'll see that here in just a little bit with this tuberculosis, because this is one of those that is coming up, that it's drug resistant. And I think either syphilis or gonorrhea, one of those two, there is a strain out right now that doesn't respond to any antibiotic whatsoever. It's just that's it. It's just going to go. There's no stopping it. They haven't come up with anything else to deal with it yet. But they look at their own knowledge that this agency's reassurance in the face of this public panic is firmly rooted in medical knowledge. It says prostitutes as well as homosexuals are at risk. Researchers suggest that they also endanger their customers. Well, of course they do. Other groups in peril are drug users who regularly inject intravenously and share needles, and those who receive transfusion of untested blood. The disease, which weakens the immune system and makes its victims susceptible to rare cancers and infections, is invariably fatal. Okay, and that's what it does. Is it takes the immune system out, and then these other diseases are able to move in. Statistics indicate that the virus was, the means by which AIDS traveled to the United States may never be clear, but the disease appears to have originated in Central Africa, where today it is reported rampant. As statistics indicate that the virus was carried to Europe by homosexuals of various nationalities from there to the Middle East and Asia. Other suspected agents for the spread of the disease include American military personnel. Well, what was it that the Roman soldiers were spreading? Remember? They were spreading disease as well, and it shows here some of whom frequent gay bars and bathhouses. As recent as 4 years ago, few realized the dangers of multiple partners here. It shows, but Yahweh shows us in that that this type of behavior, this violation, this explicit violation of what's written here in Leviticus 18, is the result of these diseases. That's where it comes from. It shows here, it says the AIDS virus incubation period can be as short as 6 months, but it often lasts 5 years or more, which means the disease can be widely spread before those initially infected know that they are victims. Thus, behind today's relatively small number of people outside the U.S. identified as having the disease lies a huge reservoir of future cases, okay? Because they keep passing them on from one to another, to another, to another. And so one of those things that is tied, that is closely tied in with this, with HIV, with AIDS, is tuberculosis. All of these articles here are actually from the World Health Organization, from their website. And this shows here, it says, tuberculosis is now the leading infectious disease killer in the world, taking the lives of 1.8 million people each year. It says a fourth part of the world's population, some 2 billion people, are infected with TB bacteria, with nearly 10.4 million becoming ill with the disease each year. Okay? What is TB? What is tuberculosis, and how is it spread? Tuberculosis is caused by bacteria that most often affects the lungs. It says it is spread from person to person through the air. It's airborne. When people with lung TB cough, sneeze, or spit, they propel TB germs into the air. A person needs to inhale only a few of these germs to become infected. Very little. How many times have you been walking through the store and you hear people hacking and coughing 2 aisles over? Okay? What if they take and they sneeze on something? They have something in their hand and they sneeze. Oh, I'm going to put that back on the shelf. And here we come behind them, picking that up. Oh, okay, we're going to take that with us. Where is that now? It's on our hands. Now what do? Oh, I've got to rub my eye. Oh, man, I got something in my teeth. It's things, men, that we really need to be cautious about. It shows here that it says 1/3. It says about 1/3 of the world's population, that's 1 out of 3, has latent tuberculosis. In other words, it's hidden. There's no signs, there's no symptoms. They're a carrier, which means people have been infected by the TB, but are not yet ill with the disease. Preventing new infections, what can we do? Our first line of defense against HIV and tuberculosis is prevention, they say. Prevention, okay, well, what's their mode of prevention? This is their answers. It's not turning from the sin. It's not turning from the things that cause it, which is what the house of Yahweh teaches, which is what Yahweh tells us to do. These things wouldn't have come upon mankind had they not violated the law of Yahweh. Their first thing that they have is antiretroviral therapy, providing life-saving care and treatment to people. They take daily doses of medication. That's their solution. HIV testing. What's HIV testing going to do? How is that prevention? That's like shutting the barn door after the cows run out. right? Availability of condoms, condom-compatible lubricants, and harm reduction interventions. Remember, there was a prophetic word out here a few years ago. Remember, it had protection written on the front of it. Remember that one? Get that, read it, rehearse it. Because there were doctors that were in there. There were doctors that said that they wouldn't, they said not to trust these condoms that they say, oh, that prevents disease. If you remember in that particular prophetic word, there were inserts. They had copies of inserts in there, and you read through those inserts, and what does it say? This product is intended for the prevention of pregnancy. It does not prevent against disease. There were 2 different ones in there that said that. But yet they're saying, oh, here, put this on and go and sin all you want to. You have protection. They're lying. They are lying. Remember they talked about the holes. It says their protection. I remember this. It says their protection is full of holes. Because the holes in these things are large enough to allow viruses through. Viruses pass right through them. I think one doctor put it. It was like taking a softball and putting a softball through a basketball hoop. I think is the comparison that was given. So, go back and take a look at that and see that. Then the other thing they have here is voluntary medical male circumcision. They say that helps prevent against disease. Well, no kidding. That's why in the law of Yahweh it's instructed to be done on the 8th day after the birth of a male child. Specifically for that reason. But these aren't prevention techniques. I mean, they don't prevent anything. I know somebody as somebody would put it, they say it's like a dog and pony show. Okay, it's an illusion. It's an illusion of protection. It's an illusion that that what you're doing is actually gonna provide you protection. But it really isn't. The bottom line is those things don't work. This tuberculosis, there's a tuberculosis fact. I mean, let's see. I don't even think this one will come in, will it? Not too well. We'll put it up there anyway. The key facts about tuberculosis is that it's one of the top 10 causes of death worldwide. In 2015, it shows that 10.4 million people fell ill with TB and 1.8 million died from the disease. In 2015, an estimated 1 million children became ill with TB and 170,000 children died. Globally, in 2015, an estimated 480,000 people developed multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. In 2015, they developed this multi-drug resistant form of this disease. Which basically what that means is that multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, it's caused, it means that they don't respond. They don't respond to the 2 most powerful drugs that are used to treat it. And then the second line treatment, so when that doesn't work, they have a second line treatment. You know what their second line treatment is? The second line treatment options are limited and require extensive chemotherapy, up to 2 years of treatment. Up to 2 years of treatment with medicines that are expensive and toxic. In some cases, more severe drug resistance can develop. Extensive drug resistant is a more serious form of that, and that bacteria do not respond to the most effective second-line anti-TB drugs, often leaving patients without any further treatment options. Yeah. In other words, once this goes, they're done. They've got no other options. And it shows here about 480,000 people worldwide developed this second form of this drug-resistant form of tuberculosis in 2015. So, and those numbers, we're going to see those numbers are undoubtedly going to be rising as well. So, on page 244. So, we just kind of hit some of the highlights out of these articles. But you can go back through and you can read them, and you can see that that things haven't changed. Things haven't gotten any better. In fact, they're continuing to get worse, and they're going to continue to get worse. But on the bottom of page 244, it shows here influences implied. It says, is it bigotry that kills, as they say, or is it, as the Apostle Jacob says in Jacob 1:15, that sin, when it is fully matured, kills? And did not this killing start through lust, as Jacob said in this same verse, and also through the rejection of the laws of Yahweh that we find here in Romans 1:22, chapter 1, verse 22 and 23? Professing themselves to be wise. Remember, professing themselves to be wise. Remember the medical knowledge that they had, leaning upon their own understanding. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools or simpletons. And they exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible Father for the images made to resemble corruptible man, birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. When they rejected the laws of Yahweh, they take on the character of Satan. They take on the character of the adversary. These influences. These influences, the influences implied. Now look this up in Webster's also. And look at the definition here of influences according to Webster's. Here it says, an emanation. See if I can get that a little clearer here for you. It says an emanation of spiritual or moral force. The act or power of producing an effect without apparent exertion of force or direct exercise or command. Corrupt interference with authority for personal gain. The power or capacity of causing an effect in indirect or intangible ways or to sway. One that exerts an influence. Okay? So these influences. So mankind has fallen to the influences of the adversary. The power or the capacity of causing an effect in indirect or intangible ways. Okay? To sway. You look at what took place back in the Garden of Eden when Eve was deceived by Satan. She was swayed. She was swayed. She was influenced. She was influenced. It was this corrupt interference with authority for personal gain. You look at what Satan did there. It was a corrupt interference with authority, with Yahweh directly for personal gain, because she wanted to separate Eve from Yahweh. Just as those influences that we're up against today want to do the exact same thing. They want to influence us. They want to separate us from Yahweh. And this is why we have to constantly be aware of those thoughts that come into our minds. And we have to put them out. We have to put them down. It's a constant battle. Anybody here feel kind of tired mentally? Yeah, I'm seeing lots of hands. I'm right there with you. It's a constant battle. But we have to patiently persist in doing these things. The social fallout from an epidemic here in Romans 1:24 through 25, it says, "Therefore Yahweh also gave them up to the uncleanness through the lust through their own minds, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who exchanged the truth of Yahweh for the lie," in which they did. They exchanged the truth. That's what Eve did. And that's what mankind has been influenced to do. Mankind has been influenced to exchange the truth of Yahweh for the lie, for the deception, for this confusion that comes forth and is perpetuated through the Tower of Babel, through that parable. Remember, we just read that. Who exchanged that truth for the lie and worshipped and served the creation rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. It says people are not willing to seek death and destruction. They're not willingly seeking that. Nobody's setting out for self-destruction because of what they've been taught, because of what the churches are teaching. Oh, you're not going to die. Just accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and all your sins are forgiven. You don't have to worry about those things. You just believe and just trust in your heart. That's all you have to do. It is because they are being misinformed. Mankind has been misinformed for 6,000 years through this Nimrod system. And it's not limited to just the churches, but it's limited to all aspects of the world out there. The medical community. Oh, we have a cure for that. No, you don't. You might hide the symptoms, but it doesn't cure it. If it cures it, why does it keep coming back? Why is it still here? If it's a cure, why is it still here? See, it's that misinformation. We have been blindsided. Mankind has been blindsided into believing this deception. But the people are waking up, man. People are waking up more and more, and they're not willingly seeking death and destruction, yet they've continually advanced these very things throughout the history of mankind. It is each individual's desire that we have peace, joy, and health, yet the majority of individuals continually go in the opposite way to find peace, joy, and health. It's because they've been given the wrong directions, they've been given the wrong path, and that's who they're choosing to follow. At the same time, it is in the mind of each individual alive that peace, joy, and health are just moments away from being found. If I just go to this bar just one more time, if I just find this one other person, if I just go do this, if I hold out here just a little bit longer, it's going to be there. It's like that carrot onto the end of the stick. They keep advancing toward it, but never get any closer to that carrot. That's the way of the world. That's not the way of Yahweh. Yahweh sets life and death. Yahweh sets life before us. He gives us the way to life. He's showing us the way to life today. Our pastor and overseer, he shows us the way to life with every publication that he writes, with every sermon that he brings, with every newscast, with every blog post. By the way, have y'all gone to Yisrayl Says lately? Praise Yahweh. That's been reworked, hasn't it? Praise Yahweh. And it's awesome. If you haven't been there, oh boy, you're in for a treat, because it is truly, truly an awesome tool. And it's there for us to use. So, but there is a way that there has to be a reason that for mankind going the opposite way of obtaining the things that he truly desires. And there is a reason. And that reason is going to be found beginning on page 246, where it says there is a reason next time. So this is where the Great Kahan will pick up next week on page 246, where it says there is a reason. So with that, man, may Yahweh be with you and bless you. May Yahweh bless your work week and protect you.